This is Jennifer Reed, digital editor for Messenger Post Media. Our editorial board is now live streaming our first candidate meeting for Ontario County Court Judge. We'll be interviewing two candidates vying for the open seat. Our first candidate is Democrat Brian Dennis. Now we're going to go around the room for brief introductions from the board before we begin our discussion.
My name is Heather Whiting. I'm the community member of the editorial board.
Hi, I'm Mike Murphy. I'm the local editor.
And I'm Sean McCrory, executive editor. We do have Brian Dennis with us, as well as a guest volunteer, Pat McCormick.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And Mr. Dennis, if you want to go ahead and give a complete introduction to our readers, that would be great.
Sure. My name is Brian Dennis, and I am running for the position of Ontario County Court Judge. I'm married in Canandaigua, New York. I have 4 children. The youngest is a freshman in high school. He's 14, and the oldest is 30 years of age. All my kids have been raised in Canandaigua, and I have worked for the Ontario County District Attorney's Office for over 29 years now. I'm actually first assistant district attorney, and I've held that position for over 26 years. Prior to becoming a member of the Ontario County District Attorney's Office, I was a law clerk, courtroom deputy in federal court in Rochester, New York, and I had that job for about a year and a half right out of law school. And other than that, I've been involved in the community in terms of being an ice hockey coach, a religious education instructor. I've been involved with Ontario and acumen. I think what's even more important is the ability to bring common sense to the job, a keen ability to listen, to ferret out what the issues are, and then to apply the law. I've also developed a sense of compassion for both defendants and victims of crime. Some people might say, well, as a prosecutor for so long, don't you feel that you would be pro-prosecution? And my answer to that is that as a prosecutor, I'm ethically bound to seek justice, not convictions. And so if I don't feel that the evidence is sufficient in a case, I don't prosecute that case. If I start out prosecuting a case and evidence is developed that convinces me that the defendant is not guilty, then I would dismiss those charges. And those are the same kind of things that a judge does. He looks for fairness and the ability to make the correct decision. So I think those skills that I've developed would assist me in being an Ontario County Court Judge.
Okay. Well, building on that, what has made you decide to run for office?
I actually ran for judge in Ontario County 15 years ago, and my desire to become a judge in this county has not wavered. The opportunity arose for me to run for judge because Judge Dorn was elected to Supreme Court, and that created an opening. Between now and 15 years ago, when I unsuccessfully ran for judge, there really hasn't been a good opportunity for me to run for county judge. So this isn't something new or something that I've recently decided I wanted to do. I began my career working for a federal magistrate, and I did research and writing, and I was his courtroom deputy as well, and so I learned the inside workings of the judicial system before I even became a prosecutor. And now it's my goal to become Ontario County's next judge.
Okay. Well, in your experience in the courts, what would you say are some of the most effective methods for improving court procedures and efficiency?
It's an excellent question, and having worked in the Ontario County Courthouse almost daily for over 29 years, I feel I'm prepared to answer that question with a great deal of experience. You have to work together. For example, if inmates are in custody, you have to be aware of the fact that it's going to take time for the corrections officers to produce inmates from the Ontario County Jail. And sometimes we have 3 county court judges sitting at the same time. Judge Dorn, even though he's supreme, can preside in county court, and Judge Reed and Judge Coker. And so you're trying to funnel attorneys, sometimes prisoners, sometimes witnesses, lawyers, to 3 different judges. So as a part of improving the efficiency of the system, I would very politely suggest and try to make sure that we try and have judges sit on different days. so that we're not push-pulling with all of the various stakeholders involved in the court system. I think my ability to be aware of how the clerk's office functions, how the probation department functions, how the sheriff's department functions, that's all going to add to my ability to more efficiently and effectively run a court here in Ontario County.
Okay. What would you say is the, in your long history in the judicial system, what would you say is the most significant case that you have worked on, and why?
There are so many cases that I've worked on, from child abuse. I mean, how could you not find that a child abuse case or a rape case was insignificant? You simply can't. But I've had cases that have gone all the way to the Court of Appeals. There was a drug case specifically where the defendant was convicted and received a 15-year life sentence. At the appellate division level in Rochester, the conviction was reversed and he was released. We took the case to the Court of Appeals. I briefed the case, did all the legal research and writing. I went to Albany. I argued that case, and the essence of it all involved an eavesdropping warrant. And I convinced the Court of Appeals to reinstate the conviction. And as a result, the individual, the cocaine dealer, was required to go back into prison and serve the remainder of his sentence. And so for me, that was an important case as well. I've had murder cases. Clearly, those are important cases. There's just so many, whether it's people's lives that are at stake, or whether it's their personal safety or their property. It's hard to pin down any particular case, but I think I've mentioned a couple of them in any event.
Have you ever had to support a legal position that was contrary to your personal moral belief?
Definitely, all the time. And I'm duty bound as a constitutional appointee and an officer of the district attorney's office to follow the law, even if it does contradict my personal beliefs.
Is there a certain way that you handle that, or you just stick with the law? This is what the law says.
I do my best. I do my best to do exactly that.
What would you say are the biggest differences between you and your competitor, Terrence Robinson?
Experience, number one. I have over 30 years of legal experience, if you include both the district attorney's experience that I have, as well as my clerkship in federal court. I believe he has 10 years of experience. So to me, that's a 3-to-1 ratio, and I think that experience weighs heavily in my favor. But more than that, it's the type of experience and the location of the experience. Every day I work in the Ontario County Courthouse. My opponent works in Rochester, New York. He is not familiar with all the different people that are involved in the court system like I am. It helps to know who the clerks are. It helps to know who the other judges are, what people's tendencies are. So in that vein, I think that there's a difference. As well, in terms of being able to work with youth, to me it's an advantage that I've had 4 kids, and most of them are grown, because you go through a lot of life experiences with 4 kids. And the oldest is 30 and the youngest is 14. And I certainly have learned a lot being a parent and raising my children. And I think that brings me a wealth of experience in terms of being a judge. And that's not to say my opponent doesn't have experience, but I know I think he has 5 girls, and I've seen them, they're all quite young. And so he's got a lot to go through, I think, to get to the stage in life where I am in terms of being experienced with raising children.
Okay. Do you believe that the composition of juries adequately and fairly reflects society at large?
In Ontario County?
Yes.
No. I can't tell you what a difference it would make if I was a prosecutor in Chicago or New York City or somewhere, or Rochester even. This is basically a county where minorities do not make up much of the population. And a lot of times it might be a minority who is a defendant. And that's a concern to defense attorneys, and they are allowed to raise it when they're asking questions of potential jurors. And all kind of issues come up with the composition of a jury. But no, I would not say that our juries are reflective of an equal composition of what's contained in the population of the county.
Is there anything that you would recommend to change it, to make it more reflective?
That's hard to do because they've opened up the jury pool now. It used to be such that it was not as inclusive, and now it's more inclusive than it was. So I would have to give that some thought about how you would get, say, more minorities into the courtroom and into the jury panel. But right now I think they're going with Department of Motor Vehicles records, voter registration records. So I suppose one way would be that if you got more people registered to vote, you might have a larger jury pool. So that might be one solution, is just not only getting people to register to vote, but getting them out to vote.
Okay. Of the current U.S. Supreme Court justices, which member do you admire most and why?
I'm going to pass on that one.
Oh, no passes, no lifelines.
If I knew them better, if I followed the individual workings of the court, I think I'd be in a better position. But I just don't want to do it based upon what I feel is a lack of knowledge of each of those justices on the Supreme Court. What happens here in Ontario County affects me on a daily basis. And when the Supreme Court issues a decision, you would think that it would be earth-shattering to us here in Ontario County. But more often than not, the New York State Court of Appeals has already given those rights to defendants and more rights. So there's not a whole lot of major influence that comes from the Supreme Court, unless it's something that the Court of Appeals hasn't already ruled on or provided more guidance with respect to.
Okay, well then I will turn it around and give you a different question. What decision by the U.S., or I'm sorry, not the U.S., but the New York Court of Appeals most affects life in Ontario County, would you say?
Ooh. If we're talking about the criminal side of things as opposed to the civil, I would say that there's been some recent decisions that have really benefited the rights of the indigent, providing counsel to defendants at arraignment. Funds have been distributed. The Public Defender's Office has received more money to hire more assistants who can be present for individuals at arraignment. So I think that's very significant, that decision from the Court of Appeals in terms of expanding the rights of criminal defendants to counsel and to the assistance of counsel, even at arraignment.
As a prospective judge, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but what would you say would be the greatest strengths that you would bring to the bench?
Mm-hmm. Well, without being too repetitive, experience.
That's not repetitive at all.
You have to know the law to be a good judge. You have to be able to listen. I think I have that ability to focus in on what's being said or what's being asked, and to ferret out what's important and what the heart of the issue is, and then apply the law in a fair and neutral manner to arrive at a decision without unnecessary delay. The court system is very, very busy, but I think to be an effective judge, not only do you need to know the law, but you need to be able to apply it without reserving decision and making litigants wait an extraordinary amount of time in order to have a decision. Now, that's not to say there's not cases that require research, but I would say that having the experience and being able to apply it are key. That and some common sense.
Right. Okay, well, in conclusion, what would you say is the primary reason voters should select you over your opponent?
I have the experience to do this job in a capacity and in a fashion that no other candidate does, in my opinion. I would ask you to not just take my word for it, though. I'm endorsed by every major law enforcement agency in Ontario County. If you want to know what kind of a person or a prosecutor or a lawyer I am, ask a cop. I've worked with cops all my career. They know me. They know my work ethic. And every major law enforcement agency in Ontario County has chosen to endorse me. On top of that, don't take my word for it. You don't even have to take the police officer's word for it. There is a commission in Rochester. It's the Independent Evaluation Committee. And what they do is they look at the qualifications of judicial candidates. I, in February, submitted an application to them. I had to provide writing samples. I had to provide my last 10 trials, the judge who presided, the name of the case, who the defense attorney was, giving them the opportunity to talk to the judges, to talk to the lawyers that were involved in those cases. I had to provide to them cases that I had worked on the appeals for the last 10 years. And like I said, I have more appellate experience than any lawyer in the history of Ontario County. And so for pages, I listed all of these cases.